this episode of the Jesus Agenda, we're going to discuss mysterious drones over New Jersey. And then we're going to ask, what's the matter with Baptists anyway? And then finally, we're going to give our honest reviews of the movie Bonhoeffer, which both of us have seen. Mm-hmm. I'm Chad Kyler, and I'm joined by my co-host and friend, Stephen Mannion. And this is the Jesus Agenda, where politics, religion, and culture come face to face with Jesus and his agenda. Before we get into the drones, we want to just at least mention some things that have transpired in the Middle East just within the last couple of days, as the regime of Bashar al-Assad was toppled by a coalition of Islamist groups led by...
I think we're going from bad to worse.
It could
my
be,
opinion.
Yeah. And this is kind of what the worry is. But the main reason we're bringing it up, I think his name is Abu Muhammad Jalani, is the leader
Bless you. God bless you.
The opposition or the rebel group or whatever. Like, he's the top dog, right? And he claims that he is... his group that he leads formerly was tied to Al-Qaeda, and he claims that he's reformed now, and he's traded in his turban for a blazer. So I don't know how it's going to shape up, but the main concern for us, at least, for Steve and I, and hopefully for you, is the situation of Christians in Syria. And we could say, I'm sure we could do a series of shows on how bad Assad was in terms of how he treated his people. I mean, there's nothing lovable there. Yeah. However, he did protect the Christian community. Yeah. He did not persecute the Christian community. In fact, Christianity in Syria has essentially flourished. I mean, It's not like it's growing by leaps and bounds, but the churches that have been there for, 1,000 years are still there.
Yeah.
So as these events were taking place, there were many Christians, especially in Damascus and places like that, who were gathered in their churches and praying and seeking God's mercy. So let's do the same thing. Let's just pray for the church in Syria, and no matter how this pans out, let's pray that God protects them and saves them and has mercy on them, because it probably is not going to be an easy go for them at this point. But so just to mention that, now we go from an area that's obviously of concern for Christians in the Middle East, and probably the other countries in the Middle East, really, to an area of concern for our own country, in that for a month, at least a month and a half or so, there have been numerous reports and sightings and even recordings of these unidentified drones. Now, I know the official term now is UAP, but I don't remember what the A and the P stand for. Is it
unidentified aerial phenomena?
Aerial phenomenon, and they've been reported multiple times. In fact, I was watching Fox News early this morning, and Rachel Campos Duffy, her kids recorded too, flying over their backyard.
And we know that they're drones. So this is in Jersey mostly, but not only, but mostly in Jersey. People, like, we're talking not like a drone flew over for 30 seconds. We're talking hours. They hover over their yard, they said. And if they move towards it, it'll move and shift, and drones all the way from the size of like the ones you buy in a hobby store all the way up to the size of small cars.
Yeah.
And some of them are very loud. And some of them have been over military bases, including in England, by the way. Just recently, there was some in England over United States military bases. Right. And
now, I didn't see that.
Yeah, that's recently.
Yeah, okay.
That was more of a recent one. And so the whole thing that's suspicious, that makes people's, creativity in their mind go crazy, is that the government's not telling us what these things are, and they're saying they don't know. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. They don't know what's flying over their military base, and they have no idea what these are. Right.
It's like the Chinese balloon, right? It flew over the whole country before they shot it down.
Yeah.
We don't know what it is. Then it gets to the East Coast and they shoot it down.
Yeah.
At that point, it's taking pictures of your mom's underwear drawer.
I know.
What are you going to do? And I
There's
agree
no way they don't know what they are.
They absolutely know. Now, I could see where local police departments wouldn't know.
No, they wouldn't know.
That I get. And
so why don't they tell us what it is? That's what makes people become conspiracy theorists and stuff. Because what are you going to do? You're going to, I mean, it's either, in my opinion, it's either some things are too big and too expensive to be private. So they're either our government, another government, Well, that's basically the two options.
Yeah.
Because they're clearly manned drones. They're not alien drones.
Right. Well, and I don't think aliens are going to put flashing lights on their drones.
Or like helicopter blades. Yeah. So
there is an interesting...
Those don't work that great in outer space.
I mean, I have seen some videos where the commenters like, geez, isn't it funny how these drones are flying in the correct FAA patterns for flight, right?
But they aren't registered.
But they're not registered.
And the ones the size of small cars have to be registered.
Yeah, that's true.
They're way too large, and they aren't registered.
Yeah, so that's it is a little disconcerting though, because there's enough trouble with it being our own government, right? You don't want that, obviously, but. I actually had an Air Force drone fly over my house in Spencerport, and I didn't believe my wife.
Shoot it down.
I don't know. What am I going to use?
I'm just telling you right now, if any of these drones are hovering over my house, I swear right now, I will grab my 12 gauge.
Well, listen.
I'll find out what they are.
Listen. So my wife...
full self-defense.
We're living in the village. We're living in the village of Spencerport in New York, which is outside of Rochester. And we had... I think my younger son was only a couple of years old. And she says, I hear something outside. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah, like that, right? And she goes, we got to go. I think there's something outside. I go, there's nothing outside. I'm the typical guy.
Was it looking in the bathroom window?
No. Okay. But so we go out to the driveway and we look up and I could see it fly over. I mean, wasn't quite like pitch black. It was probably dusk or something. It was maybe 6, 7 o'clock at night. But I watched it slowly go over the house, and it was big.
How do you know it was Air Force?
Because I called them. And I asked if they had anything flying, over that area, and they said that they did. So if you call them and it's not something that's, secretive, but they wouldn't be flying that low if they were trying to keep it a secret. Because you figure if you can see it from the ground, it's flying pretty low.
But I have to believe. I tend towards our government because, let's face it, I think they would shoot them down over our own military bases.
But if there was they didn't shoot
I know, but hovering over a military base,
I don't know.
Who knows these?
I got to be honest with you, I don't know
these people.
I really don't know. I mean, is our military really?
I can't wait for Trump to come in and fix this.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Is what are the standing orders?
I know.
What is it that our military is supposed to do in any given situation, let alone somebody's flying a drone over the top of the base?
Yeah, like you said,
you don't really know.
They let these the balloons. Did you see the whole thing in Hawaii? A couple years with the green lasers that were shining over, and
they
just
planes even.
There's literally a base right there.
Yeah,
that could send an airplane up and shoot it down.
Right.
But they let that one go. It's like, what the heck?
So that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
and the Biden administration, honestly, whoever's running the show, has been making some really... they've made a lot of dumb decisions over 4 years. But what I'm getting at is, in the last months or the last dying gasp, they're doing all kinds of things that just don't make any sense. Yeah, we've talked about that repeatedly. But so, I wouldn't doubt if it's a foreign government, and let's be honest. If anybody has any motivation to do it, it's China. They've gotten away with it by having balloons.
Russia too, but they're tied up right now.
And that balloon was just one balloon. Yeah. There were multiple.
Well, I think
balloons.
there was 3, wasn't there?
Well, yeah, but those are the 3 we know about. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I read something in the Free Press not long after that indicated there probably have been numerous that have just gone either.
I think it was Botswana.
Unreported or Botswana. Yeah. No, it was I think if we're
always up to something.
If we're gonna go
your microphone ready, by the way.
If we're gonna go small third world countries, let's go with like, what's the one? Djibouti.
Yes.
What's the capital of Djibouti?
If it isn't Botswana, Djibouti.
It's Djibouti.
They are known for their... That's where that phrase, don't pull a Djibouti on me.
That's right.
That's where that comes from.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that, anytime there's problems, you can pretty much blame it on Djibouti.
Yes. If it isn't Russia, then it's Djibouti. Yeah, I personally think Trump conspires with Djibouti.
With Djibouti. Yes. With somebody's booty, maybe, over the time. There's been a lot of accusations along that line.
Him and Diddy.
But, so, we can get, it's good to talk about stuff like this. Obviously, it's good to question, what our government is doing, what it's not doing, what it's capable of doing, etc. And even to wonder, what is going on? Is it a foreign bad actor? Is it
ask questions.
Our own government? But we're reminded in Scripture that even when we're going through uncertain times, we're encouraged to trust in God's sovereignty and wisdom. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." So
He's still King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
absolutely. And so, God's sovereignty doesn't necessarily mean that He's, manipulating every aspect of your life in some sort of deterministic sense. But it does mean that God is still in control no matter what happens. And so, I kind of think of that as I'm thinking about both of those stories, both the drones and what's happening in the Middle East, in Syria. And I was really touched by, and I shared it. It was shared by a friend of mine who is an Orthodox priest. There's I don't know if it's a Facebook page or an Instagram
Orthodox?
Antiochian Orthodox.
Okay.
And he, the page is called Eastern Christians. I don't know if it's a Facebook page or not. Excuse me, but he shared it on Facebook, and it was an image of a church in Damascus with the people the evening before the government toppled, because the government troops were retreating from these from homes, not their homes, but HOMS homes, the city, and from another city that had been overrun, and they were retreating back to Damascus. And the thought was, at least the military strategist thought was, that they were going to take their last stand around Damascus, but they just dispersed. They just totally dissipated. So now the Christians are gathering in the churches.
Assad fled, and he's in Russia
went to
now.
Russia, sought political asylum, right? But this one video of a church in Damascus, it was this big, like, cathedral style ceiling with an image of Christ's pantocrator on the ceiling, which is very common in Eastern churches. And pantocrator, by the way, means ruler over all. So just the image alone is teaching you that Christ is sovereign, right? And they're singing this just lovely song. This, the translation is coming up about their faith will not waver. They will not turn back. Have mercy on us. And so my heart goes out to them. But when I think of that situation, or just any situation, the drones, anything else that's going on, as Christians, we have that word of comfort that God is in control, and we are to trust in Him.
That's right.
And so all of that said, we're coming up. We're in the middle of Advent, coming up on the third Sunday, and this last weekend, before we get to Christmas, we have a commemoration day that commemorates Saint Nicholas.
Yeah.
That's December the 6th, and we wanted to take an opportunity to talk about Saint Nick a little bit. I'll just give briefly the history. He was born in 270 AD, died in 343 AD in what is today Turkey. He became the Bishop of Myra after, and this is kind of a funny story, and we're presenting this like it's the history. However, with a lot of these early saints, the history is a little murky. So you might have one line of thought or one line of history and another line of history. This is probably the most widely accepted legend of how he became the bishop. He had gone and lived in the Holy Land for a period of time, where he is said to have lived in a cave near the cave where the Church of the Nativity is built over top of in Jerusalem, or Bethlehem rather, and also in Beit Jala there is a church built over the cave that he supposedly lived in Beit Jala, which is a entirely Christian town in the West Bank. But anyway, on his trip back, he supposedly is in this boat that faces these terrible storms, and so the men all come to him because they know that he's a holy man. He's just lived in the Holy Land. And so he prays and the storms stop. And so they end up in this port, this town of Myra, and he gets out and Nicholas heads for the closest church he can find so that he can give thanks to God. Well, what he didn't know is that the priests of that area had gotten together the night before because they had been having a tough time selecting a bishop. And so they had agreed with one another that the next morning, the first man to walk through the door of the church would be elected bishop. and Nicholas walks through the door of the church and gets elected bishop. So whether or not that happened or not, he was in fact the bishop of Myra. He was known for his generosity.
Which is where the Christmas present.
Which is where the Christmas present thing comes
from.
Stories
of him leaving dowries for women who couldn't get married. Poor people leaving. Again, like Chad said, these are stories that have been passed down. There's probably an element of truth to the giving to poor people. By the way, if you have a chance, watch on Netflix Expedition Unknown. If you get a chance,
you were saying that
he does a really good, fair, balanced. Josh Gates on
I didn't even know it was on
Unknown.
Netflix.
Yeah, I think it's on Netflix. And anyways, find Expedition Unknown. The most recent episode is on St. Nicholas, and he does a really good and about the giving and the chimney thing actually comes from him too. The story traveled, like you said, that there were times where he would drop money into people's chimneys because these are flat roofs, right? These weren't like our tiered roofs and flat roofs. He would drop it in the chimney and then jump to the next house and escape because he didn't like to be seen. And so that's where the whole chimney thing came from. But I wanted you to share the story about the Council of Nicaea. So that's the best.
So here's the best story about, at least for pastors, this is the best story.
It gives me the warm and fuzzies, this one.
So the story goes that St. Nicholas was a participant in the meeting at Nicaea that was called by Emperor Constantine. And here again...
By the way, let me plug it. Chad wrote, because he probably won't, Chad wrote a little book.
Very small.
That's on Amazon right now. Do you say print's coming out in like a week or two?
I'm not sure when, because there's a whole separate...
Okay, well, I'm waiting for that one, but it's on there for Kindle right now. It's in the book's called...
Faith Confessed, a Lutheran perspective on the Nicene.
So get that on Amazon today.
And if you don't have a Kindle, that's okay. Just download the Kindle app on your phone or your iPad.
Or just wait for the print like me.
So this notion of Nicholas being at Nicaea is, there's two lines again. One line says that he was there, but somebody for some reason erased his name from the list of bishops because he doesn't actually show up on the list of bishops who were there. Mm-hmm. And then the other line just simply says, well, he wasn't there. That's why he's not on the list of bishops. But if the story is accurate, right, then there's actually a good reason why his name would have been taken off of the list of bishops. So
he may have been removed after this.
Well, he was punished according to the story that says that he went to Nicaea. After his action that we're going to mention here, he was stripped and told that he could no longer preach and no longer minister the sacraments. So if that was the case, now he was restored later, but if that was the case, then somebody removed his name and just forgot to put his name back on, or maybe they just hoped that the whole incident would die out, right? So the Council of Nicaea was called, and this is. There's obviously anything like this that we talk about, there's more complexity to it, but for sake of brevity, we can just give you the kind of like the highlights of it. So there was a priest in North Africa named Arius, priest pastor. We use those words interchangeably for the first 5 or 6 centuries of the church. And Arius believed what today's Jehovah's Witnesses believe in terms of who Jesus really is. Arius believed that Jesus was a creature, a creation of God, the first creation of God, right? So he wasn't divine in nature, which means, and there's an argument over 2 Greek words.
Homoousios or homoousios.
Right, and one of them is that he has a similar attributes, and the other one is they share the same essence, right, or the same attributes. So Arius was preaching this idea that Jesus was not divine, he was not God in the flesh, and that was catching on all over the place. Constantine, who was actually, evidence indicates that even towards the end of his life, he was an Arian himself.
Yeah, he was baptized by an Arian.
Yeah, so, but we're not positive if that means he was an Arian or not, Anyway, he called this council together. Now, Constantine gets a bad rap from historical revisionists who like to say that he only had political motives. Constantine was a Christian. He came to faith, and we should be thankful for that.
And he did want peace.
And he did want peace.
So he called
and those two things are not mutually exclusive, by the way. And Constantine ended the Diocletian persecution.
And by the way, he moderated. He didn't control the council.
He actually
that's another thing.
He had
going
no
on.
input. Right.
No.
He had no theological input at all.
He called it and moderated it.
He the Edict of Milan was the first thing he did, which lifted the persecutions. It ended the Diocletian persecution, which was the last,
which was bad,
and which was probably the worst. That one and Nero's persecution. And he lifted that, and he gave the Edict of Milan, making the church legitimate. But then, after he becomes a Christian, he starts to elevate the status of the church. So we can't have this disunity in the church. So he calls the bishops together, work this out. Now, it doesn't appear that, especially if he was an Arian himself, that he really had a dog in the fight in terms of, because if he was an Arian, then he would have just overturned what they did, right?
It was an overwhelming loss for the Arians.
Yeah, big loss. The bishops came together. They voted overwhelmingly to reject Arianism.
I believe it was 3 that voted the Arian way.
Something like that.
Yeah, it was way over.
So now we have what we call Nicene Orthodoxy, which is the true, proper understanding of not only Christ's divinity.
Which we have a follow-up with us about that.
The Baptist. Right, we do. But also Trinitarian understanding, which is fully developed later in 381 at the Second Council of Nicaea, when the Holy Spirit is added. But here's where St. Nicholas comes in. St. Nicholas obviously loved Jesus very much, and the story goes that Arius, actually this is true, Arius was making songs about Jesus not being God. Now, I read a book to children around St. Nicholas at my church that was published by Voice of the Martyrs, and the way they put it is, Arius was making fun of Jesus, and Nicholas was like, "Oh hell no!" And he steps down and supposedly slaps Arius across the face. So
like not a bitch.
No. I just like
palm.
Like I didn't close
hard.
my fist, but it was like Mike Tyson smacking you in the face. So we found this meme that.
We have a song for you today
that redoes a popular Christmas song with Arius instead of, or not Arius.
It's up on the housetop
with Nicholas, instead of the original song. So here we go. Up at Nicaea, bishops pause, Arius and Santa Claus. One claims a time when the sun was not. One says that's a heretical thought. Ho, 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 who's gonna go? Ho, 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 who's gonna go? Off with the right hook, good Saint Nick. Down goes the dirty heretic. That was great. I love it. So that's the story.
By the way, they if you watch the Josh Gates, I highly recommend you watch it.
I will.
They're
my son loves that guy.
Archaeologists, you know how the Catholic Church claims they have these bones of saints and a lot of them are fake. That's one that they are pretty sure they actually have his bones.
Yeah, well, they built a church over.
Yeah, they actually have part of it got split at one point, and they tested where these people who said they have the new portion, and they tested them. They're the same person.
Oh, really?
I mean, it all lines up.
Oh,
and
definitely
Josh Gates even acknowledged it's likely actually St. Nicholas's
and
skeleton.
it's kind of weird to see the how Turkey treats like Turkey's got this like fundamentalist Muslim guy in charge now, right? And Turkey's kind of like a secular Muslim country, but Islamism has really been coming up. But then when they have a tourist attraction like St. Nicholas's,
because money, brings in tourists.
It all boils down to money. But so St. Nicholas's story at the Council of Nicaea and just what was produced there, the Nicene Creed, leads us to ask what is up with the Baptists, particularly the Southern Baptist Convention. You may have heard in their annual meeting of messengers, which is what they call their annual convocation or convention or whatever you call it, they voted not to add the Nicene Creed to the Baptist faith and message, I think is their official statement of faith. And there's some clarifications we need to make. First, there were actually 3 motions made to adopt the Nicene Creed into the statement of faith. 2 of those motions were referred to the executive committee, and 1 motion was killed because it was ruled improper, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
Or ruled out of order or something like that.
Yeah, because it was a change that thing from the floor, and they can't do that.
Well, they made that, but see, this is where we might have conflicting info, because
Well, because
I read,
let me share where I got mine. Because
Yeah.
I heard about it in the news, and I wanted to see what the Southern Baptists said about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they're kind of making it sound like this one guy tried to the message I got was one guy tried to change their official stuff from the Lord by emotion, which can't be done. So they didn't really reject it. But the fact is they actually did. So
well, they did in an executive committee.
Yeah, right.
But
and for all this time, why haven't they accepted it?
What I read was from Baptist News, which I don't know if it's SBC affiliated or not, but that's where I got the 3 motions were made, 2 went to executive committee, and the way they reported it on Baptist News or Baptist Global News or something like that, their report was that the idea of not being able to change the statement of faith from the floor was actually a motion in response to the motion they killed.
Yeah, see, I'm getting they're giving like parts of information.
Yeah, so either way, the motions that went to the executive committee were not adopted. And one of the biggest opponents to those motions, or to the adoption of the creed, was David Allen, who's a professor at Southeastern Seminary, or was a professor at Southeastern Seminary, which is in North Carolina, I believe. And he is one of the leading candidates for SBC president. Now, I don't know if he was, I didn't look to see if that meant he's leading in the next time they have the election, or if he actually won the election at the most recent meeting. But I guess it leads me to question some things. And at first, I want to start off by saying that nothing that we're saying now, even the fact that they chose not to adopt the creed into their statement of faith, that should not be heard by anybody as us saying that they're not part of Trinitarian Orthodoxy.
Right. Or they're not Christians
or that they're not Christians.
Or they're our brothers in the Lord.
Baptists are clearly Trinitarian. Yeah. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
It just raises some questions.
It raises some questions about like what would be the reason to not accept a creed that was produced within the first 7 ecumenical councils that everybody else agrees on. Yeah, in fact, I know like membership in the World Council of Churches, not that you necessarily want to be in that if you're worried that it's too liberal, but it is an important ecumenical group that even Orthodox groups belong to. You're required. You have to accept the Nicene Creed in order to be a part of that.
I do think, I mean, obviously, I have to ask why haven't they accepted it yet? It's not even so much about right now, but obviously, I confess one baptism for the forgiveness of sins, or for the remission of sins, we say. It's more of an older term, and because in the Baptist theology, they do not believe baptism remits sins, right? It's just a symbol, right? And so obviously that's like something, but I don't, so that's like obviously something where I could see them having problems with it. But I also think there's a general like, and this is something I appreciate about Lutheranism and about Methodism, is there's kind of tendency in like the Reformed tradition and in Baptist to throw anything that smells remotely like papism. Papalism, right? So, the Catholics accept that. I'm not saying that's their motive, but it just there is that tendency.
There is definitely,
if anything seems Catholic-y at all, we're going to reject it. And obviously, I can see. I just wish they would say that. That's why they reject it. If they would say, okay, we're going to treat that Nicene Creed because as Baptists we don't believe that baptism remits sins. Okay. At least you're pointing out your problem with it. Because if you don't point it out, then people are going to come up with all these. So again, this is like the drones, right?
Then my response
you leave it unanswered, then it causes problems.
My response to that becomes then you don't believe Peter.
Yeah,
because
I agree. I'm on your side with this. But
but even if you say it's more than baptism is only a symbol. It's not a symbol. It's an act of obedience. Yeah. That's what they've turned it into.
Right.
It's something you do for God instead of the other way around.
It's a symbolic act of obedience.
But they could still confess what Scripture says and figure out a way to make that fit in with their theology, right? Because Peter, when they asked Peter after that's the first time you really see it. Well, of course, there's John's baptism though was a baptism for remission of sins too. But when we get to Peter after Pentecost and he's preached this sermon that the Spirit has.
Why don't you read that verse? Do you memorize?
Is it I wrote it down actually. And they ask him, well, what do we need to do now that we've heard this message, and he says in verse 38, repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins.
There you go. All that is in the Nicene Creed.
That's literally
a quote from the Bible.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard for them to say, well, that's not true.
Yeah.
Like you said, say we accept this, but here's what we think that means.
Yeah,
There's any Baptists who have a problem
right.
with it.
You can do that, and because everybody does that anyway, right?
Yeah. That's a quote from the Bible. You can't say it's not true.
Like, for example, you cited Lutheranism. So in Lutheran circles, prior to the 1970s, when our green hymnal is called the Lutheran Book of Worship, which started off.
We used the red hymnal.
Well, this is one that came after that.
Yeah, see what I mean?
The green hymnal started off. The green hymnal started off as an intersynodal hymnal. It was the Missouri Synod. There was no ELCA at the time, so it was the ALC, the LCA, all these other groups had gotten together and said, we're going to create this hymn book together, and they did. The Missouri Synod pulls out at the end, right before publication, for their own reasons. It's probably, honestly, the best example of Lutheran hymnody and liturgy that we have in America. Anyway, up until then, in the Creed, both the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, Lutherans always confessed one holy Christian and apostolic church, okay? Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that. The reason is that in Germany, when the creeds were first translated from Latin into German for the German documents, Christian and Catholic were interchangeable. Mm-hmm. There was no Roman Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. Everybody was Catholic. So what happened is a lot of those groups, when they spread out to other places, they just retained that German translation. When the 70s came and they brought us the green hymnal, they said, well, we want to be more in line with the other Catholic Christians, the Anglicans.
Universal.
Yeah, we wanted to be, so we went to calling it Catholic. Mm-hmm. It was a hard sell for people because they had been saying Christian for so long.
Yeah.
So finally, when the newer hymnal started coming out, like in the Missouri Synod, in my own groups, they just said, we're going to go back to Christian because it's easier to deal with that. It's also less confusing for people who come in and see how we worship and go, geez, it looks like a Roman Catholic Mass. Maybe this is a Roman Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we say, I believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, without explaining what that means to us. Mm-hmm. Or having to explain it over and over again. It's just easier to say Christian.
I used to have to explain that all the time, right, DJ?
But do you get what I'm saying? So
Catholic means universal. There's always somebody who's like,
they could have done the same thing. The Baptists could have said, like you said, this is what it means to me.
Right, we have to do that, yeah.
Now Albert Mohler, who's maybe still the president of SBTS.
I don't think he is anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he was at one time a candidate for president of the SBC. But anyway, I actually am okay with his objection more than David Allen's objection, which was just like, we're just not going to do it, which I think has more to do with what you're saying. Because Mohler says...
I'm sorry, it's Albert Mohler. It's still him. I'm
That's
sorry. I thought I heard he retired, but I got so wrong.
He basically said we don't need the creed. It's superfluous because we already believe this. So I thought, okay, at least that's a better argument. At least say... We just don't really need it because we already know what we believe about the Trinity.
But there's such a power in tying ourselves to each other in the historic creeds of the church. I mean, like in the Global Methodist Church, we acknowledge obviously Nicaea, Apostles, and the Chalcedonian definition. Yeah. Those are like our three.
What about the Athanasian Creed? Is that part of
that's not one of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are our three universal creeds.
So
Catholic
I don't know
creeds.
that we don't technically. I don't know if the Chalcedonian definition is in our, it's in our confessions, whether it's listed as we affirm the Chalcedonian confession. I know we consider the three ecumenical creeds.
I'll look it up.
Because I don't think is Chalcedon, though, part of one of the 7 ecumenical councils? I don't think it is. I thought Chalcedon.
No, I think
Chalcedon
it was
regional.
Yeah.
So that's why we don't officially have it in our documents, because it's not one of the ecumenical
What is it, the North American Lutheran Church?
Yeah, you could actually just go to bookofconcord.org, and that'll tell you.
Okay.
But in any case, I agree with you. I think there are lots of differences that we have, and we've mentioned this before. The differences are important, but they shouldn't be so important that we're not able to confess the things that we can confess together. And that's part of the Catholicity of the Church. Be able to say that, we believe these things about Jesus. We believe these things about God the Father and about the Holy Spirit, and we hold these things in common with one another. And if you don't believe these things, now, again, that's not the same as saying if you don't confess this document. But if you don't believe these things, you're simply not Christian.
Right.
And so we can say to, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses, you are not Christian. It's not that you don't have Christian elements, you do. Mm-hmm. And I've known a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. They're wonderful people. Mm-hmm. And their motivation is great to want to go out and spread, they're spreading the wrong message, but just spread the message, right? Yeah. Mormons, same way. I typically like Mormons better than Jehovah's Witnesses, but
some Mormons are great. Like
Mormons it's the same thing, right? They don't.
Some are warriors for good morals.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
they don't confess the Nicene Creed.
Like Glenn Beck, for example.
Glenn Beck's a great guy.
He's a warrior for stuff that's good, and he's a Mormon.
Yeah. Glenn Beck actually was a big part of my conversion from sort of being left of center to my slow conversion to conservatism, but. But in any case, this is we've said this before that creeds and confessions, they serve as bumpers, like in a bowling alley.
Yeah.
That you can go this far and no further. And that's what the Nicene Creed is. It's part of that. This is what Christianity is. You have to confess this. If you don't confess the document, whatever. I don't really understand. And I think there is an element, we kind of joked about it on Facebook, Baptists just want to be separate. And there is a strong separatist current in Baptists, but the SBC has its own problems because they've got a wing that's Calvinist.
Yeah.
They've got the majority that's Arminian, and the Calvinists have always kind of been, at least the last 15 years or so, they've been on the rise. And that is probably as scary to the SBC as anything else. And if you are a Calvinist, doesn't that mean that you do confess? Because I think their primary confessions, the London Baptist Confession of Faith, which is just Westminster with a few Baptist changes. So I would assume that the Reformed guys maybe it was Reformed guys that made the motion to adopt it, right? Well, listen, so we're talking about churches left and right, Methodists, Lutherans, Baptists, all over the place, and people that are
all over the place.
People that are not churches, like Lutherans, like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons.
And United Methodists.
And now's a great time to say, hey, we would love for you to help us with this show and sponsor an episode if you'd like to do that. Say you have a church, parachurch ministry, a nonprofit organization, maybe you have your own podcast or show, or you've written a book or something like that, and you'd like us to talk about it, to advertise it, to say whatever you want us to say within reason, send $20 and you can sponsor an episode, and we'll be happy to do that. And also, just within the last few days, we've put up a way for listeners to subscribe and sponsor the podcast as supporters for as little as $3. And we're going to put the link in the comments or the description of this video so that you can go to our Buzzsprout page. And there's no commitment. You don't have to do it every month. You can do it one time. You can do it every month for 6 months and stop doing it. It's up to you. The most important way you can support us, though, is to share this podcast with your friends and your family. And we've said this repeatedly, but Facebook suppresses our ability to forward this. So you have to do it through your email. You have to do it through your Messenger app or WhatsApp or your text messages or whatever. That's the best way to get people to listen. And if you're a local pastor in the community in Western New York, especially where we're at, we'd love it if you'd put a link on your church page. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But we would love to have your support either way. So the last thing we want to talk about, I think both of us are kind of looking forward to this because both of us like Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
He's one of my heroes.
And Angel Studios just released a movie on Bonhoeffer. And I want to first say that regardless of the criticisms I have, which I do have a few, it's worth seeing. The movie is. First, because it's not a bad movie. And secondly, because I want people to support Angel Studios. And, I grew up evangelical, and every Christian movie I've ever seen was the cheesiest piece of crap that I ever had to spend time on.
Yeah.
And it's not just about money. It's about time. Like, I can't believe I watched that garbage.
Yep.
Right?
Oh, they were bad.
The stuff that Angel Studios is putting out, and you may not agree with either one of us on Bonhoeffer.
And folks, there is artistic license that's allowed in movies.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that a bit. So you can't be overly critical about license, but there's one part of it where I do want to just mention, just because it looks because it's quite misleading, but it's okay. I mean, it's licensed as long as you know the real history.
Well, share who Bonhoeffer is briefly.
So I want to mention
about him.
So let me just finish my pitch for Angel though. Watch Angel Studios seriously, and if you can become a guild member, I think it's like $150 a year. You'll have a voice in what they produce. You get an email that says these 3 projects are up, and which one would you want to see? Okay. The movies that I've seen so far that they've done, Mother Cabrini was excellent. It won awards.
I bought it, but I still haven't seen it.
Well, it won awards, and Sound of Freedom made more money than any independent film in history.
Oh, that's good.
So we want this to go well. So go see Bonhoeffer. So who is Bonhoeffer? I want to preface this by saying, as much as I love the man, and I've enjoyed much of his writings, I've read most everything he's written. Bonhoeffer would have been completely unknown had he not lived where he lived during the time that he lived, because Bonhoeffer was essentially par for the course when it came to German theologians. There was nothing extraordinary about Bonhoeffer. He did have some insights.
He's known for his bravery, largely.
He's definitely known for his bravery, but he did have some insights. I would suggest most everybody will tell you, if you want to read Bonhoeffer, which I sincerely hope you will.
Life Together.
Well, most people go to that or Cost of Discipleship, but I think you should start with Christ the Center, because Christ the Center is where he presents his Christology. And everything about Bonhoeffer has to be understood through his Christology.
So his big popular books are Cost of Discipleship and Life Together. Yeah. But you're saying that you recommend...
I'm saying read Christ the Center. That's the first one you should read. And then when you go to read Life Together and you go to read Cost of Discipleship or his letters from prison...
Yeah, those are good too.
You're going to understand him a lot better. And if you ever get a chance to read Ethics, which he didn't get to finish, but there's some great... And I actually have a quote from Ethics.
He started that in prison.
Started that in prison. I have a quote from Ethics. It's literally my favorite Bonhoeffer quote. We're going to hopefully end the segment with that. But Bonhoeffer he's the kind of figure that everybody claims for their own purposes, right? He's like Jesus, really, if you think about it.
And every quote that isn't by Augustine's by Bonhoeffer.
Right, yeah. But Bonhoeffer is, he's claimed by progressives because he was a political activist. He's claimed by conservatives, which is what this movie kind of was conservative propaganda to a certain extent. But you really cannot understand Bonhoeffer until you understand that the way Bonhoeffer viewed the world was Christologically, period. Even at Finkenwald, the underground seminary, he explains to the students that you can't hate the Nazis. You can't, because a lot of those students, even from that seminary, ended up conscripted in the Nazi army.
Forcibly, yeah.
So are you going to hate them? Because they got forced to do this. So it's a very complicated thing, and I do have a few things to say about it. I'm going to let you go first, though. I do want to say that I enjoyed the movie very much.
Oh, I thought it was great. I mean, like you said, overall,
it was a good movie.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of... Before I saw the movie, if you watched the news about it, the family... hates it, some historians, but some historians love it. It's
the family hates it because they think it's a conservative biopic.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The family is liberal, very progressive. So anything that's going to come across making him seem like he's like a mainline Christian is going to be they're going to poo it. Yeah. So I hate to say this, but I don't care what his family thought about the movie.
Yeah, I don't.
I care more about what have you
Chad
Kyler thinks about it than
what have you done?
Their family cares.
Bonhoeffers. I've never heard of you.
I know. And they're a bunch of nobodies whose great grandfather was a bold, amazing man.
Right.
And Bonhoeffer had we don't have time to get into this, but he had his problems.
Well, sure, he was neo-orthodox.
Yeah,
and Bultmann was probably his biggest influence, and Karl Barth and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so anyway,
but that's okay, by the way. I don't think that Karl Barth and we don't have time to explain who they are. You're going to have to Google them.
Yeah.
In fact, if you don't know Bultmann, I don't think you can be a good theologian. I think you need to know these German theologians.
Yeah, he loved Karl Barth.
And to a lesser extent, Thielicke, who comes later. I think you need to know who these people are, even though you're your overly conservative prof at seminary says, "Oh, they're liberal." They're not liberal. They're neo-orthodox. There is a difference.
One of the things I appreciate,
maybe, but
one of the things I appreciate about the movie in general was they didn't over emotionalize. You know what I mean by that? Like they didn't play like really music whenever he was going to be hung, for instance. It was quiet.
Don't gay up the manly movie.
Right. So his execution, for example, which you'll see, it was quiet.
Yeah.
And they just showed him walk up and
it was
it
was kind of uneventful.
Yeah.
It was like
he looked at the sun and smiled because he knew he was about to go see his maker, and then you hear the
and that's it.
And that was like basically the end of the movie, you know. And so I did appreciate that. There's obviously I mean, you probably know a lot more about Bonhoeffer than I do, but there's obviously, I don't. Was there exaggeration? Because I felt like some stuff might have been exaggerated.
I'm going to tell you what I spotted, and I went with a few church people, and my associate pastor and his wife came along, and my wife, and so here's the things that I spotted. So first of all, the scenes in America. He never took a trip to D.C. He never got beat up by a hotel guy.
Yeah.
That's artistic license, but it becomes very clear that they're trying to build a backstory as though he was on the verge of becoming this civil rights guy in America long before he got, back to Germany, right?
Yeah.
So that's just non-existence. It is true that he was in New York City for about a year.
And involved
he did go to Abyssinian Baptist Church. That's the extent of it. There's definitely, but all that other stuff was kind of...
He was very impressed with their worship.
Oh, absolutely.
That was part of it. Yeah, he said that. The spiritualism.
But he wasn't,
spirituals
playing jazz at clubs or anything. And so what they were trying to do is they were making
that's what I meant by exaggerating.
Yeah,
they exaggerated stories to
and those stories were like made up whole cloth, basically.
Yeah.
Which is okay, I get.
But I see them singing and some of those. Yeah.
Yeah. It just seemed like it was
like we don't know that's any of that.
It was an attempt to make him look like an activist in development, which is not a fair assessment. There's a lot of I will say that probably my biggest criticism overall is that the screenplay looks to be lifted right from Eric Metaxas. And I don't dislike Eric Metaxas, but I don't think Eric Metaxas is right about Bonhoeffer in a lot of ways. He makes him way too political. So for me, Bonhoeffer is a theologian.
Yeah, well, Metaxas takes what happened to Bonhoeffer in Germany and makes it apply directly to the United States.
Right, which is which is
not that there's nothing we can learn from him.
No. Yeah. And again, I don't dislike Metaxas. Yeah. I like Metaxas. Yeah. And there's things even about his biography of Bonhoeffer that I liked. I just think that this movie was taken directly from that, which is fine. I mean, they have to have some kind of source material, right? Also, and this is the part, this is kind of, there's two things really that I had the bigger problem with. So
he was too good looking.
No, but I thought the actor did a great job.
He was too good looking.
I actually thought the actor did good. I was worried.
He made American Lutheran pastors look even uglier than they actually are.
Yeah. No, I'm way better looking than Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I might not be as good looking as like Brian Wolfmueller down in Texas, but I'm pretty good.
I don't know who that is. I'll take your
Google
word for
him.
it.
You'll see. No, or who's that priest that's on TV all the time? The really chiseled priest. He's got
the real young guy.
Yeah. What's that guy's name?
Victoria likes him. He's the young guy. She does him on Halo.
That young. He's probably in his late 30s.
Mike Schmidt?
Yes, Mike Schmidt. Not. He doesn't look as. I don't look as good as Mike Schmidt. That's one. That's a guy.
This Wolfmuller guy is not good looking.
Listen, Mike Schmidt. That's a guy that all the Catholic women went, damn it.
Yeah.
When he became a priest.
Yeah.
So
he's like a model.
Let me finish, right?
No one ever looked that good in clerics.
Poster boy.
And he's pretty built too, man.
He definitely went to an Orthodox seminary because he probably would have got raped if he went to one of the regular Catholic seminaries.
Yeah, he's almost built he's almost as built as our producer is.
Did you want to comment about your wife's crush on Mike Schmidt?
No, I was going to comment. He was, I don't think he was engaged, but he was dating somebody.
Oh, really?
Like, very seriously.
Oh, yeah.
As he was a priest?
Yeah,
no.
before.
Well, they can actually, no, seriously, though, for minor seminary, I think is like, they do 2 parts of seminary. It's like 6 years. Minor seminary, major seminary.
Which is philosophy for minor and then theology for
and
major.
you don't have to make the celibacy commitment until you get into major seminary. Right. So for the first 3 years of seminary, you're discerning whether you're going to be a priest. So you can date.
Can you imagine going on a date with your clerics on? Yeah. Holding hands, making out in the movie.
I don't think you're supposed to do
I
that.
don't think you're supposed to do that.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, let's get back to the topic at hand now that we've veered off. But here were the three things that, if I was going to say, were the biggest criticisms I had. The first is, it's right in the title of the movie, right? Bonhoeffer, assassin, spy, yada yada yada. There's very little evidence.
Is that what it's called? Assassin, spy, yada yada
yada yada yada yada.
Huh.
It's the Seinfeld edition.
Huh. I must not have seen the same movie as you.
The evidence for Bonhoeffer's participation in the attempted assassination on Hitler is scant.
Yeah.
It's very murky.
He knew about it.
He did, because his brother-in-law was clearly involved.
Yeah.
But whether he was involved or not,
that part where they showed
know.
him being a spy and going before the Fuhrer and all that stuff, is we don't know that. Right. That. Yeah.
The other issue is that he did work for the Abwehr, but he wasn't trying to convince England to give him a bomb for an assassination. He was just passing messages from there to the English clerics, and so that was a little overplayed, and you know.
But again, it's a movie.
It is a movie, right?
They have to sell
the
a
other
story.
issue, though, that I have that's connected to that is he wasn't arrested for that. He was arrested for smuggling 7 Jews into Switzerland.
Yeah.
He doesn't even get implicated.
Which the movie did it for that reason.
No,
Didn't they?
No, he's arrested for the assassination attempt.
Because they found the money.
They did that, but that's after he's arrested for the assassination.
Oh,
attempt.
okay.
So they mixed it up. They have him arrested for the assassination, and then later he gets pinned for the 7 Jews. It actually happens the other way around. He gets pinned for smuggling Jews out of the country. For that act, by the way, the Holocaust Museum in America has given him the title of Righteous Among the Gentiles. Yad Vashem in Israel won't do that because he had some previous theological writings about Jews and Judaism that they disapprove of. But here's the thing. This is where I say to you that Bonhoeffer was a typical Lutheran German theologian, and nothing that Bonhoeffer wrote about the Jews we would disagree with because they were theological arguments. Even if you go further back, people say Luther was anti-Semitic. No, he wasn't. Nobody was anti-Semitic when Luther lived. People were against people for religious reasons, not for ethnic or racial reasons. And Luther wrote against the Jews in a theological sense.
So I can hate Lutherans, so that's okay?
No, because we're not a race. No, my point is that these were theological arguments. So Yad Vashem...
Fair question, I think.
Yad Vashem will not... You love me. Don't even try it. Yad Vashem won't give him that title because of those writings. However, in the movie, he's arrested for the assassination attempt. In real life, a year later is when they implicate him in the assassination attempt. So they needed that, I think, because under German law.
It was like guilty through association more than anything.
Right, and he was convicted because they needed it to kill him. They couldn't just kill him because, believe it or not, the Nazis, as evil and wicked as they were, did follow the laws that they implemented.
He was a civilian.
I mean, think about it. He
was a respected family, by the way.
Yes, they were a well-to-do family. Even their annihilation of Jews was a legal matter. They passed laws to do it. It wasn't, so it's not like they just went on. Please don't hear what I'm saying as saying that it's okay. What I'm saying is the reason they had to pin the assassination attempt on Bonhoeffer was so they could execute him. They couldn't execute him for smuggling Jews into Switzerland because it wasn't technically against the law or it wasn't a capital offense, basically, right? So I have a problem with that. The other critique that I would say is, and it's also tied to the assassination attempt, and it's the scene in the attic, and it's him and his brother-in-law and his student from the seminary, which, by the way, they did a really crappy job of explaining because it comes off as though it's this training ground for anti-Nazi activists, and it's really a seminary to ordain pastors for the confessing church. That was the purpose of it. But in the attic...
I got the impression it was just a seminary, but probably because I knew that was true.
Well, yeah.
I knew what it was.
We both knew it, but I asked the people I went with what they thought, and they're like, oh, isn't that a place where they're learning how to, I said, no. But the attic scene basically looks like he turns away from what he had always preached and what he had always said as a Christian in favor of conspiracy and a political solution because he has that comment about his dirty hands and about I'm realizing that prayer's not enough, and that's not. There's no way Bonhoeffer would have ever said anything like that. So that's what I mean by like the over politicization.
Yeah, sometimes prayer isn't doing enough or
Yeah.
something. He said, "Yeah."
No, he actually says I realized that prayer's not
okay.
enough. Right?
Yeah.
I had to go back and look the line
Again,
up to make sure.
I think I was hearing these things. My brain was self-editing because I know who Bonhoeffer
Well, because we know who he is.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I want to double back and just say the movie is definitely worth seeing.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it's even still in theaters right now, but if you get a chance to
It
see
was on Friday.
If you get a chance to see it, go see it, because we want to support. They are, and let me just say on the opposite end of this that the production value was very high. I mean, that alone is what makes these movies better viewing experiences. And the acting was not bad. The script wasn't the greatest. The biggest complaint I think I had and that I heard from the people I was with is it was hard to follow the timeline because they had too many flashbacks and flash forwards and stuff like that. They probably could have done with a little bit less.
He isn't doing a very good job selling it, does he, DJ?
Well, no. I guess why it's important to me is that I want people to know who Bonhoeffer was. Like an example, the North American Lutheran Church, our seminary in Pennsylvania, just purchased a house for our students because our seminary is actually housed at Trinity Anglican Seminary. And so we wanted, the denomination wanted to have a place for our students.
It is not in theaters anymore.
Okay.
By the way,
so we bought a house and they named the house the Bonhoeffer House. So Bonhoeffer matters to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I want people to know who Bonhoeffer really was. But at the same time, I want people to, a lot of times people experience the first thing of a person that they want to know more about is through modern media. And so I want you to go see the movie because I want you to support Angel Studios, but I also want you to get interested in Bonhoeffer so that you can then go and read Bonhoeffer and read about Bonhoeffer. And believe me, there is no lack of books written about Bonhoeffer from every possible perspective. Just make sure that you understand that when you're going in, that everybody tries to twist a guy like Bonhoeffer into their own guy. And I don't think he can really be pinned down. He was a committed Christian and a German theologian to the end. And I think that that's probably the most important thing we need to remember. He was a Christian and a theologian, and he had a pastor's heart. Mm-hmm. And I have this quote that I do want to share because this is probably my very favorite Bonhoeffer quote of all, and it comes from his book on ethics. And this is what he says: God loves human beings. God loves the world. Not an ideal human, but human beings as they are. Not an ideal world, but the real world. What we find repulsive in their opposition to God, what we shrink back from with pain and hostility, namely real human beings, the real world, this is for God the ground of unfathomable love. God establishes a most intimate unity with this. God becomes human, a real human being. While we exert ourselves to grow beyond our humanity, to leave the human behind us, God becomes human. And we must recognize that God wills that we be human, real human beings. While we distinguish between pious and godless, good and evil, noble and base, God loves real people without distinction. God has no patience with our dividing the world and humanity according to our standards and imposing ourselves as judges over them. God leads us into absurdity by becoming real human beings and a companion of sinners, thereby forcing us to become the judges of God. God stands beside the real human being and the real world against all their accusers. So God becomes accused along with human beings and the world, and thus the judges become the accused. And that's probably the quote that I go back to more often than not, because it helps me in my own pastoral practice to see people the way God sees and to not divide people. And it's so easy to do as a pastor, especially, right? Because maybe there's people we only see once a year or twice a year, and we have this tendency to say, oh, they're not that committed, right? Mm-hmm. We think about that. That's not how God divides the world. And I need to stop dividing the world. And so I read this quote as a reminder to myself to not give into the temptation to divide people in my own congregation, let alone people outside of my congregation. It's not my job to judge. It's my job to feed you with the word and the sacraments, and that's it. I bring you Jesus, and if you're there to receive and eat, you'll be fed. So, well, with that said, and I like this episode. I think this was great. But next week, guess what time it is? It's DJ time. DJ's going to be giving us our topics for each area, each segment of the podcast.
And he's not going to tell us.
Are you going to do an evil grin or evil maniacal laugh?
It'll only be on the inside.
It'll only be on the inside.
There.
So we're looking forward to that. So tune back in next week. As always, this is the Jesus Agenda. Thanks for listening.